Okay, welcome everyone, especially any members of the public who are watching our proceedings. This is the April meeting of the Scrutiny Board, the last one of the municipal year. And I think I'm going to start off rather than ending by thanking all the board members before I ask you to introduce yourselves individually for your contribution over the years. I think we've had some very good, incisive and productive discussions, and I thank you for your contribution. I'd also like to specifically pay tribute to Councillor Neil Dawson. Obviously, this is his last meeting of this Scrutiny Board. May well be, I don't know, Neil, your last formal programme council meeting before you retire. I'd like to thank you in particular for your contributions to the Scrutiny Board and to wish you a happy retirement. And I'm sure that retirement will still include some contribution in some shape or form to the benefit of the community. So with that, I'm going to go through and ask the members of the board alphabetically to introduce themselves. And I'll start off with Councillor Neil Buckley.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Councillor Neil Buckley, or Woodley Ward. And can I just, for the record, associate myself in those remarks with Councillor Dawson? We'll miss him, and I wish him well.
Thank you. Thank you, Neil.
Moving on to Councillor Cunningham.
Morning, Councillor Lou Cunningham, Armley Ward, and all best wishes to Neil Dawson on behalf of Armley councillors.
Hey Neil, this has almost been like being at your own funeral. The man himself, Councillor Neil Dawson.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for those kind words. In particular, thank you, Lou. I mean, I have very fond memories of Armley, that I actually got married and went to school in Armley, so place I knew well. And I will be enjoying a long and happy retirement. I hope to help in some way with Hunslet Rugby League Club in the future. As a Hunslet lad originally, you know, I'm looking forward to helping as much as I can down at Hunslet Rugby League Club, which I believe is in your ward, Paul.
It is indeed. It is indeed. No, we look forward to seeing you, Neil. No, we knew we wouldn't get rid of you that easily.
No, I'll still be a thorn in your side.
Yeah. Councillor Dye.
Yes, good morning, everybody. I'm Councillor Katie Dye from Killingbeck and Seacroft. Neil, I send my best wishes as well.
Thank you.
And yeah, thank you very much.
Councillor Goddard.
Thanks, Chair. Good morning, everybody. It's Councillor Jacob Goddard from Roundhay Ward, and of course, best wishes to Councillor Dawson.
Councillor Hussain. Has Councillor Hussain? Yes, he has.
Yeah,
Hi, Arif.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning to everybody. Councillor Arif Hussain from the Gifton and the Hare Hills, and also very good luck and wishes to the Neil's business. We have a really great time in the civic last, I think, 10 years. So look after yourself and your family, please. Thank you.
This is almost beginning to sound like Neil's retirement do. Councillor McSood.
We're just trying to get hold of Councillor McSood.
Okay, moving on to Councillor Shazad, who I know is definitely here.
Yeah, good morning, Chair. It's Councillor Mohammed Shazad from the Moortown and Meanwood Ward, and I'd also like to extend my best wishes to Councillor Neil Dawson. It's been great having him on this board and working alongside him. Thank you, Neil.
Councillor Taylor.
Good morning, everyone. Councillor Jonathan Taylor, Horsworth and Roden Ward. And of course, best wishes, Neil. I hope you enjoy your retirement.
Councillor Wadsworth.
Good morning, Chair. Councillor Paul Wadsworth representing Guys in Roden, and of course my best wishes to Neil in his retirement. It's been a breath of fresh air to see him all this last year via Zoom.
And finally, myself, I'm Councillor Paul Truswell, and I represent Middleton and Belle Isle, and I chair this Scrutiny Board. I have done over this last year. Okay, so I will introduce or ask other executive board members, other councillors and officers to introduce themselves once we reach the agenda items for which they're attending. So going through the usual housekeeping requirements, Agenda item 1, appeals, no appeals. Agenda item 2, exclusion of public. There are no items for which this is appropriate. Agenda item 3, late items. There were no late items. Agenda item 4, declarations of interest. I assume that those would have been made if there were any. Agenda item 5, no apologies. That takes us on to agenda item 6, the minutes of the last meeting, and in my usual customary fashion, I will go through them page by page. If members have any corrections or any matters arising which they wish to raise, then please shout out. I can just report that on on minute 74, if you remember, the board agreed to make 2 recommendations in relation to the planning item that we discussed as a result of the referral from Councillor Scopes and Councillor Illingworth, and a letter was sent to Councillor Walshaw. The anticipation would be that the discussion on the local plan update would be taking place on the 2nd of March. However, due to the need to respond to latest national changes, I think that has been deferred until May of this year. So with that, I'll go through page by page. Page 5, page 6, page 7, page 8, and page 9. So with the permission of the board, I will sign those as a correct record when I can physically put pen to paper. Right, that brings us on to the 2 substantive items on our agenda, agenda items 7 and 8, which obviously are closely linked. And really are updates on an inquiry or continuing inquiry that we started as a board almost 6 years ago, when we looked into the future at the digital agenda. I think it's fair to say that at that time, it didn't exactly occupy a high place in terms of corporate priorities. But since that time, and I think due to the commitment of executive board members, of officers who worked extremely hard, and I'd like to think the occasional incursion of this scrutiny board, it has now firmly driven its way up to the top of the corporate agenda. And I think that's been a really good thing and has been demonstrated over the last year in terms of our ability to respond to the challenges of the pandemic, not just in lockdown, but I think the future challenges in terms of recovery and resetting our approach as a council and as a city. So enough from me. I'm now going to ask those members and officers who are attending for this agenda item to introduce themselves, and I'm going to go through them in the order that they're listed in front of me. So first of all, Councillor Mary Harland.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm Councillor Mary Harland, recently appointed Exec Board Member for Economy and Culture, which digital inclusion sits beneath, and I also represent the Kippax and Methley ward.
Okay, thanks very much, Mary. You're welcome, and welcome also to your new portfolio, which I'm sure will involve your attending regular scrutiny board meetings. Next, moving on to Leonardo Tantari. Leonardo.
Hello, everybody. I'm Leonardo Tantari, Chief Digital Information Officer for LCC and CCG. And I'm here today for 2 papers, the digital inclusion and the smart city.
Thank you, Leonardo. I have Bev Fisher on my list, but I don't see her.
No. Bev would have come if I had no availability, which is this week.
Righto, thanks very much, Leonardo. Stephen Blackburn.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Stephen Blackburn, and I work for Leeds City Council, and I lead on the Smart Cities programme, Smart Leeds, which incorporates the digital inclusion work as well.
Thank you. Jason.
Thank you, Chair. Hello, everyone. I'm Jason. I lead the 100% Digital Leeds digital inclusion programme.
Okay, thank you. Ali.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Chair. I'm Ali Kay. I'm the First Sector Development Manager at Leeds Older People's Forum, and my role is working pretty much exclusively with the Leeds neighbourhood networks.
Okay, thanks very much, Ali. Good to see you. And finally, Caroline.
Hi, good morning. Sorry I was late. A few technical issues. My name is Caroline Otieno. I work for Leeds Community Healthcare and I'm one of the senior project managers. Thank you.
Welcome. Okay, the way we're going to move through this agenda item is that I think Leonardo is going to give us a broad introduction. Jason is then going to present the paper, and then we're going to give an opportunity to both Ali and Caroline to make their contributions. So, Leonardo, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm not going to steal the thunder from Jason or Steve later on. It's fair to say that there is a lot of work which has been accomplished from a 100% digital inclusion, also from a smart city perspective. And we have also some guests as well in terms of presentation today. So one of the things that, as Jason and Steve will mention, is that we'll go through the report, but moving forward, we will focus also on some of the key metrics in terms of outcomes of all the initiatives really which we are running for 100% digital and also for smart city. And that's important in terms of measuring the true outcome from anything that we spend public money on, to be honest. So I'm not going to spend any more time than this, because I think Jason and Steve are better suited to go through the report, particularly as I've been here only 3 months. I have reviewed both reports in detail, so I'm aware of any of the initiatives that have been undertaken through last financial year, but I think it's better for Jason and Steve now to have the flow and guide us through the reports.
Okay, thank you very much, Leonardo. So over to you, Jason, who I think has been with us on these reports almost from day one.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, been a pleasure. And I would echo the comments that you made in the introduction. I think when we started this work in 2015 was when you originally called that inquiry into digital inclusion. Yeah, had absolutely no idea that, you know, this is where we would be 6 years later. And I think your comments also, particularly around the last 12 months and the, you know, obviously you knew that digital inclusion was an important and growing agenda even back in 2015. It's grown even more over the last 12 months. And I think the report that we'll go through in a second just highlights how digital inclusion over the course of the current pandemic has impacted on so many different sections of our communities, whether that's children and young people, families having to home educate, adults with disabilities, physical or learning disabilities, living in poverty, living on low incomes, through to older people who've been advised to shield and have perhaps had pre-existing health conditions, through to people in hospital, living in care homes and struggling to get face-to-face visits from friends, family and loved ones. Across all sections of our society, digital inclusion, if you have been digitally excluded over the last 12 months, life has been so much harder than it has been for all of us anyway. And the report tries to set some of that context. What we do know, and section 2 of the report sort of positions the 100% Digital Leeds team and their role in that strategic systems leadership aspect from a digital inclusion perspective. What we do know is that there have been organisations, and we're going to hear from a couple of them in a moment, who have supported the people that we're talking about over the last 12 months, but much longer than that. And they support them in all kinds of different ways, from putting food on the table to putting roofs over their heads in lots of cases. But what those organisations perhaps haven't been confident to do is to support those people digitally and from a digital inclusion perspective. And that's the role very much of the 100% Digital Leeds team, is to work with those organisations, whether that's third sector, colleagues within the council, colleagues within the NHS, health and care, to support those organisations so that they themselves are more confident to support the people that they're already working with and that they're already supporting in lots of other aspects of their lives. And so section 2 sets out that systems leadership role of the 100% Digital Leeds team in terms of increasing the confidence of those trusted intermediaries so that they can support the people that they're working with and increase digital inclusion for the people that we're talking about. And section 3 of the report, really importantly, talks to the point that Leonardo was making about how we evidence the impact of all of the work that we're doing in that space. We have in previous reports talked about our evaluation models and our return on investment frameworks and things. All of those were designed pre-COVID. They relied on surveys of the people that are becoming more digitally included and conversations with our trusted partners. That's been much more difficult over the last 12 months. People's behavior may not have changed because they've become more digitally included. It may have changed because their behavior change was mandated by government, or they felt like they shouldn't access certain council or health and care services because they didn't want to put pressure on those services, or they were scared at risk of COVID. There's a whole range of reasons why our previous evaluation frameworks don't work in the current situation. But we are working with Leonardo, with colleagues in the council, and with colleagues elsewhere nationally to come up with new evaluation methodologies. But what we have done over the last 12 months, accepting that the previous methods didn't work, was to look at new ways of evidencing the impact of the work that the 100% Digital Leeds team have been doing. And that fits, just as you were saying, Councillor Trustwell, into that wider framework, the wider economic framework that the council is developing around. It's fair to say the previous 12 months was almost like an emergency response. And now we're at a point where we're doing that reset and renewal, taking that step back and looking at how digital inclusion can support organisations and support communities, so that as we look to build resilience, digital inclusion is not just an emergency response and a short-term intervention. It's actually part of these organisations and these communities' forward plans, in a sense. And we'll hear, section 3 does talk about some examples of that with organisations across the third sector, and we'll hear from Ali particularly how that work has made a difference for older people. But section 3, and we can have conversations, questions and answers later after we've heard from Ali and Caroline about specific examples of the work that we've done in that space. But I think it's just section 3 sets out that building resilience at an organisational and at a sector level, so that the city and the communities and the people that we're talking about are more resilient moving forward, and that digital inclusion plays an integral part in that. Section 4 of the report talks about digital inclusion as one way of reducing health inequalities. Health Watch Leeds particularly have done a lot of work in this space over the last 12 months. They have spoken to people from communities of interest across the city, and they've produced 2 reports that have highlighted how a move to increasing digital health and care has the potential for benefits for lots of people, but also potential risks for people who are digitally excluded. And if we don't increase their digital inclusion, their health inequalities could grow, their access to health and care services could reduce, because they cannot access digital rehabilitation pathways. They can't access NHS services online. They can't access some of the apps and tools that would help them to self-manage their condition. So section 4 talks about digital inclusion and health inequalities, and Caroline can talk much more about that from her experience. And then section 5 talks about access to equipment and connectivity. We know that that's not the only barrier to digital inclusion, but it's absolutely one of the barriers. And that's been highlighted over the last 12 months, I think, most often, most frequently, in terms of children and young people and home education. We know that there are families across the country who have struggled and their children have fallen further behind because they haven't been able to access devices and broadband and Wi-Fi from home over the last 12 months. We go into some detail in section 5, happy to take questions when we get to that point. But I think it's fair to say that officers, councillors, community schemes and organisations within Leeds have done some amazing work to fill that gap. They recognised the need 12 months ago. There were schemes being started to set up as soon as the first lockdown started in March and April last year. And we try and give a brief summary of that in section 5. in the report. Section 6 talks about the work that the 100% Digital Leeds team have done regionally and nationally. As some board members will know, previous reports, 100% Digital Leeds has been for some time now an exemplar in terms of how the programme has worked beyond silos, across sectors and across the city, working with all different communities and all different sectors. And we've had over 100 contacts from councils, from NHS bodies and settings, from third sector organisations across the country. And that's been quite informal over the last sort of two and a half years since the 100% Digital Leeds team has been in place. But that's been formalised more recently with funding that we received from Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, which is outlined in section 6 there. But the 100% Digital Leeds team, working with colleagues in Croydon Council and in Eastbourne, has created a digital inclusion toolkit, which is essentially a website where any council, local authority, health and care body, or third sector organisation can look at this website and see how we've done 100% Digital Leeds, but also how our partners have done digital inclusion as well. So the website is designed as a collaborative space where colleagues across the country can ask questions, can take some of our learning and can hopefully apply it in their areas. And that will help, hopefully, to formalise some of those contacts and some of the presentations that the 100% Digital Leeds team have been asked to give, sharing previous scrutiny board reports, sharing our experiences, essentially. That's been formalised now with this digital inclusion toolkit. And then the final section of the report, section 7, articulates some of the work that's ongoing at the moment, but has been spoken about again at previous scrutiny board reports, about the 100% Digital Leeds team moving to the Digital and Information Service to formalise the way in which we have worked over the last couple of years. So it's that, as Councillor Harland said in her introductory comments, it's how the 100% Digital Leeds team and digital inclusion more broadly supports wider council agendas. So it is supporting inclusive growth and economic recovery, but it's also supporting the health and wellbeing agendas, and it's supporting the smart city ambitions, and so on and so on and so forth. And the feeling is that because the Digital and Information Service already works in that way and works across silos, works across council and works across the city with colleagues in CCG, that the 100% Digital Leeds team sitting within the Digital and Information Service will enable us to expand that systems leadership role. And then the library service, which is where the team currently sit, will take on much more of that delivery of those digital inclusion activities and interventions. So some of the things such as delivering some of the digital champions training that the 100% Digital Leeds team currently does, managing and administering the tablet lending scheme that, again, the 100% Digital Leeds team currently does. Some of those things the library service can then take forward and lead on. So it's just, formalising some of those conversations that we've had before. But I think if you're happy, Chair, if we hear from Ali and from Caroline next, and then we can take questions and have conversations around any of the detail of the report, if that's okay.
Yeah, thanks very much, Jason. Ali, over to you.
Hi. Well, Leeds Older People's Forum is a membership organisation for third sector organisations who work with older people. And we aim to promote the well-being of older people in Leeds and give a more powerful voice to older people in shaping their city. And as part of this, we actively represent older people's views, their needs and aspirations. And we work to support projects that enhance the well-being of older people in Leeds. And digital inclusion is now, as the past year has shown, a really important part of this. You know, the push for older people to get online during the pandemic was absolutely phenomenal. And a key part of our work around this is very dependent upon, I have to say, it's a really wonderful relationship that we have with 100% Digital Leeds. And I was new in post at the start of the pandemic. And the relationship we have with 100% digital Leeds was established very, very quickly in a very, very responsive and proactive way. I think there are three key things about working with 100% digital Leeds that have been really important to us at Leeds Older People's Forum in terms of having a really proactive and very giving partner. And I think that is their approach to partnership, their collaborative approach, and their inclusiveness. All those things are really core to our work at Leeds Older People's Forum, and they're really something that we look for in our partners. And this is really underpinned by their fantastic knowledge and skills, not just about digital and tech, but because they work citywide, they have this fantastic strategic approach, which has really enhanced our work with the neighbourhood networks. And I think the really important thing is that within the overall strategic objectives of, Leeds becoming a digitally inclusive city, is that 100% digital Leeds and LOF have a really person-centred approach. They never forget that at the end of the piece of tech is an older person struggling to work out how to use a mobile to get online and do their shopping, or struggling how to access the video on their iPad to connect with family in Australia. And they never forget that. And I think those values have brought so much to neighbourhood networks and older people in the past year. And I think as well, their inclusive approach means that they really understand the importance of locality in Leeds. We know that Leeds is a city, but each area is so unique, has its own character, and so many different groups working within the city and living within the city. And when it comes to digital inclusion, well, I guess with any group, but my area of expertise is around working with older people, you not only need to understand older people, but you also need to understand different groups, whether that's with a group whose mother tongue isn't English, or a group who have a long-term health condition. They all have different needs when it comes to accessing digital. And I think that's been a really important defining feature of our work with 100% digital in the past year. Because I think for 100% digital, there are no barriers to digital inclusion. I think one of the challenges for neighbourhood networks and many other third sector organisations was not necessarily that older people didn't want to get online, but it was often the staff themselves who may have been a bit afraid of digital and not understanding how different things work. So there's been a two-pronged approach, really. It's about supporting staff and volunteers within organisations as much as it is about supporting the older people. So I think what we've achieved working with 100% digital in the past year, which there is absolutely no way we could have achieved that ourselves. As Jason said, they bring an expertise to the third sector. So at the start of COVID, out of all the neighbourhood networks, I would say there was only one neighbourhood network that had anything that resembled a digital service offer for their users. I would say now that over 12 months later, not all, but I would say that most neighbourhood networks now have a semblance of a digital service offer for their service user. And if they don't have a digital service offer, they will be providing one-to-one support to older people to support them to get online, which, within a space of a year is absolutely phenomenal. And we've worked very, very closely with 100% digital Leeds, first of all in working with the neighbourhood networks, but we've then also been able to expand that to the broader third sector, working with older people. And the ways we've done that are through, we have something called neighbourhood network skill shares, which take place on a regular basis. And I think we pretty much started our working relationship, and I have to give a special mention here to Rachel Ben, who works specifically with older people, because her enthusiasm, her knowledge and her friendly approach, I think, you know, she can get anyone on board. And I think that's been really, really important when it comes to digital, because it just helps to make people feel really safe about using tech, and starting to understand things like storage, megabytes, and the difference between MiFi and Wi-Fi. And I think to be able to break that down and make it understandable and take the fear out of digital is really, really important. So I think it started off really by Rachel coming along to a neighbourhood network Skillshare to talk about digital. And because of the citywide approach, which she was able to do was to bring in expertise and peer expertise from other organisations. So it started partly by a bit of show and tell, but then also about explaining the 100% digital Leeds offer. And from there, that then grew to us working in partnership with 100% Digital to actually develop what is now become the Neighbourhood Network Digital Inclusion Working Group. And that's a bit of a misnomer, because it's not just neighbourhood networks, it's also the broader third sector. Age UK are a really important partnership in that, a really important partner in that. And the Digital Inclusion Working Group meets every month. It's been meeting every month since last November. And what that provides is a space for staff and volunteers working in third sector organisations who are responsible for developing the digital inclusion offer to come together on a monthly basis to talk about their organisational needs, the gaps in their learning, but also to share knowledge and learning and tips and expertise. And that relates to different tech to use, to how they work with older people, different ways of working with older people, the variety of the offer that they have. And as part of that digital working group, we also have a Slack page, which for those of you who might not be familiar with Slack, is an online platform that is almost like instant messaging. So we now have I think we've now got 40 members involved in our Slack page and the Digital Inclusion Working Group. So that's really worked to expand the offer from the neighbourhood networks to the broader third sector. I think crucial to the advance of digital inclusion for older people in the city over the past year has been the Digital Champions offer. That's been absolutely vital in training third sector staff and third sector volunteers. So, for example, I've said the neighbourhood network in the Guiseley area, once their staff and volunteers had received the digital champion training, they just took off. Their digital service offer had gone from being very, very little. They had tech that they could not loan for love nor money to suddenly being desperate to find funding for more tech because of the demand from older people. And actually, they produced with their older people a wonderful dance video for the International Day of Older People. And that was as a result of the training that they discovered. But because of that, they've then also been able to do peer-to-peer learning with other neighbourhood networks and share what they've done as a result of that. I think other things that have been achieved through the partnership is the growth of funding coming into the sector to support digital inclusion for older people. We've been able to support neighbourhood networks and third sector organisations accessing pots of funding, either through 100% Digital Leeds or through things like the Leeds COVID outbreak older people's grants. So in the second round of the Leeds Older People's COVID grants, over 14 of 29 projects were digitally related, which I think even 3 months prior to January, we wouldn't have seen. And I think that is very much in part due to the work of 100% Digital Leeds and Leeds Older People's Forum. We've also supported the development of new networks between neighbourhood networks and others. For example, the arts organisation Performance Ensemble, through the digital working group, was able to develop new working relationships with 6 neighbourhood networks, and on the back of that, receive funding to work exclusively with older men, supporting them to get online and develop an arts project based around storytelling. We also want to, as an organisation, we would like to access more funding in partnership with 100% Digital. We've recently submitted a bid to the NHS Charities Fund to do some work around health hubs. We also want to, we want to work more closely. We want to build more on the digital working group as well. In terms of the impact on the sector, we now have a very broad digital inclusion services offer amongst the neighbourhood networks and more third sector organisations. We've now got more staff and volunteers trained and confident in developing digital inclusion services. People know they don't need to be experts. 100% Digital Leads are there as the experts. They just need to know how to hook older people and how to develop confidence. There's more peer-to-peer support with third sector organisations supporting one another. And I think there's more evidence. I think once organisations start to see the evidence, one woman at Hope in Osmonthorpe, for example, she said, she cried happy tears for days after the team were able to support her to connect with her family in Australia, who she'd not seen throughout the pandemic. Other older people are able to maintain their independence by now being able to do their shopping and their banking online, enabling them to feel more confident and maintain emotional and mental well-being. We've got a fantastic range of projects across the city which have been supported particularly by the Digital Champion training. Bramley Elderly Action, for example, got an older people's COVID grant. They set up an online book group. And the comments from the older people in that online book group were, they were just so heartwarming. But they were just saying, we've hardly spoken to anyone during the pandemic. I'm now using my voice for the first time in ages. These older people have not been out. They said it's preparing us, for when lockdown ends, that we'll be able to get out and use our voice. People have made new friendships. So it's really maintained that connection within their communities. In terms of the reset and renewal, I've already mentioned a bit how we really want to build on our partnership with 100% Digital Leeds. As far as we're concerned, the partnership is really only just getting going now. And there are things in place already to do that. Through the Neighbourhood Network Digital Working Group, we've already put on one event which was oversubscribed, and actually we even had people from Zambia and Brazil attend that event. And that event was showcasing the fantastic work that's been done around digital inclusion and older people in the city, showcasing both 100% Digital Leeds and the digital inclusion strategy and the great work of the neighbourhood networks. We've got a second event planned for later this year as well, in early summer, where we're looking at developing digital services as lockdown ends, and as we move out of lockdown, then what do digital services begin to look like, and what does that blend of services look like? We do also want to focus on digital inclusion and health and well-being, because that's really important for older people, and we've also already started to do some work around that. And I won't talk too much about that because I know Caroline's going to be talking about that. But that's really important, supporting older people to manage their own health and well-being within the holistic centre, within the holistic setting of a community-based third sector organisation. There's still a long way to go. There's still lots of older people not online. And I think this is very, very much the beginning of supporting older people across the city to get online. And I have to say, it's an absolute pleasure. It's one of the joys of my work, working with Rachel from 100% Digital Leeds. We've learned so much, and I know the neighbourhood networks and other third sector organisations have, and I think that's really shown by the dynamism and energy of the neighbourhood network digital working group, which already has achieved so much on hardly any funding. But we're very excited. We've got £8,000 funding to do some work around the reset and renewal, and we're going to be working with 100% Digital Leeds in the next week to actually start putting that project and work into action, which for us signifies the next step of our work. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Ali. You've given us some really good insight into the practical work that's been done digitally with the older population, which has been, as you say, absolutely crucial. Caroline.
Yes, hi there. Thank you for this opportunity to come along. I do apologise, I'm slightly in the dark as I've had to zoom around due to my technical issues, which is quite ironic considering that we're here to talk about digital today. So thank you for that. Ali, that was really interesting to hear about. It's really fantastic to hear all the great work that's going on in the third sector organisations and how that's all coming together as well. So my role, I'm Senior Project Manager within Leeds Community Healthcare. So I have recently been project managing the implementation of virtual consultation, which is how really we came into contact with 100% digital. Leeds Community Healthcare, we offer services right across the city within children's services, adult services, and also specialist services to a wide range of our population. Obviously, at the start of March, actually, I joined my role at the start of March, so just a few days in the office and everybody went home and we all had to think, oh my goodness, how are we going to provide services to those that need it? We had to reduce some of the services so that we could focus on having the right capacity of staff for those that most needed it. But ultimately, people still needed that communication with the health services that they needed to stay well. So back in March, we started to implement virtual consultation at speed. Most staff were not comfortable with using this way of communicating. It was new to everybody and to us too, I'm sure. But their passion and the drive was there to try the best, to roll the sleeves up and really try and reach the people that needed them in whatever way they could. So just looking at some statistics recently, I just had a quick peek earlier, very estimations, but in April last year, there were around 137 virtual consultations taking place each month. And in February this month, we're looking around 3,000. So you can see how much that has, we've really moved forward with that in a way of offering options for digital consultations within our patient and family base. What has begun to emerge over the time as we've started to do some reset and recovery, as a trust, we've started to step back, we've started to look at, okay, let's take stock. We've had to react within a pandemic, we've all had to do our best, but where is the kind of the sustainability within this? Where's the infrastructure to ensure that this continues? And how do we ensure that everybody is being offered the options of digital and we're not making the assumptions that some people don't want to do that, or perhaps they're too old and therefore it's not relevant to them, or perhaps they're too young and that's also not relevant. So we started to kind of think about how we could look at these areas and start to address these. In terms of strategically within the trust, we have a digital strategy, and digital inclusion is now at the forefront of that. It wasn't previously, it wasn't really considered as a priority as much as it is now. We've also have a third sector strategy whereby that commitment is there to engage more with the third sector through our partnership development manager who's recently been appointed. We also have a health equity lead that's also been appointed and a digital innovation lead. So you can see very much that the shift of digital has really happened as we've started to see the impact that this can have for people. Overall, as we've started to look at reset and recovery, we've started to realise actually some of the staff don't feel digitally confident, and therefore if they don't feel confident, they don't always offer that as an option to other people. And also we've started to notice gaps where certain areas of the population are not engaging in this way. And we started to think about, well, why is this and how is this? And that's led us with the conversations with 100% Digital, particularly Amy, who's been fantastic, and Rachel as well. They've come on board, they've come within our trust to offer the Digital Champions training, which has been wonderful. It's been really great to enable our staff to look at those assumptions and start to understand what wider services are out there to help people. We've also developed a digital champion network, of which we've invited 100% Digital to be part of. So they come on board and they give advice and also increase confidence, but are also part of our wider thinking, strategic thinking, so we can make sure that we've got the right elements in the way that we're implementing that makes sense to the whole of Leeds. And 100% Digital have played a vital role in that, really. We've also, what we've done, what we recognised as well, is that actually, if we're getting to the point where we're offering a digital or a virtual consultation and a patient isn't confident and they may want to go to a third sector organisation or to 100% Digital to understand how to use the systems that we're offering, how do we make sure that those people helping people are already up to speed? So what we've kind of done is we've opened up the training that we offer in the trust out to the third sector partners as well, and that's been a really good collaboration. It's been a really good sharing of skills. So third sector organisations have come to the training virtually within LCH and really understand what the offer is that we're giving to patients, so they can better advise from that part. Another part that we've been involved with 100% Digital was actually as we started to change our clinical systems records, so that now we're very much looking at quality impact assessments when we have a digital step in a process. And we started to record that on our systems to say, if somebody has said, actually, no, they don't want to be in contact this way, why not? Is it because they don't have access to the right skills or a device? And we started to go a little bit deeper around that. But in doing so, what that then did was highlight the issue of around how do clinicians, at the point of offering a digital appointment that somebody may want to have but can't because of those barriers, what do they do next? Where do they go next? How do they access the multitude of skills and opportunities within the third sector quickly, because their time is short, efficiently and effectively, so that that patient is directed to the right area? So we had a chat with 100% Digital, and there isn't currently a solution. But what Amy really did do, and hats off to Amy, she was so skilled. Her knowledge of Leeds is incredible. We came up with a solution. We've written a bid to try and gain some money so that we can have one place, one platform to go to that would enable clinicians to understand where can they signpost people, not only for digital inclusion, but for any additional requirements that they might have. And this has been, it's been a brilliant collaboration. So not only our idea, but bringing together all the NHS providers throughout Leeds, the GP Confederation, LTHT, our mental health provider as well as Health Watch and Habitat. We've pulled together a bit and hopefully we'll be successful, but if we're not, we'll look for another solution elsewhere. But for me, what that demonstrates is that there is so much good work going out there across Leeds, and often there is sometimes a barrier between healthcare as it stands and actually accessing some of those third sector organisations and the offers that they have. 100% Digital for us has been a crucial part in building that bridge between a newly emerging world for us of digital and the newly emerging issue around digital exclusion, and trying to help us find not only practical solutions, but helping us to embed our strategic thinking around that as well. So we really look forward to the next steps. We are going to be doing lots of work within our neighbourhoods, and now that we've built those really close relationships, that's something that we really look forward to in the future. So thank you to 100% Digital. It's been a great journey so far.
Okay, thank you very much, Caroline. I'm sure that Amy and Rachel will be submitting regrading applications on the basis of the tributes that are being paid to them today. So obviously note that, Leonardo and Jason. I think you've left us all punch drunk, but in a really good way, about the enormity of the work that's taking place within Leeds at the moment to address issues of digital inclusion or exclusion, depending on your perspective. And I think it really does reinforce the message that Leeds is literally a leader in the UK on this agenda. So with that, I'm going to bring in Councillor Cunningham, who's indicated that she wishes to speak and ask a question, followed by Councillor Buckley. So Lou, and then Katie.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you, team. So my question is a general one to the 100% digital team. So we're seeing a vast increase in the digital inclusion around the city, and often within groups, as you've said, who haven't had access before. As an admin of a community Facebook group, I've had to jump in a couple of times where people who are new to being online and onto Facebook, where they've perhaps shared sensitive data. And we all know that there's an increase in scams becoming much more sophisticated. So my question is, what work are we doing on safeguarding our digital inclusion and safeguarding the people who might be new to these online forums? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cunningham. Thank you. I'm happy to pick that up, but happy for
away,
anyone else to jump in. Really, really important point, and made even more important because of the people that we're working with. So the people that we're talking about who are digitally excluded, in lots of cases, are vulnerable for other reasons as well. And it's particularly, well, the two groups that I'm thinking about are children and young people, especially. We've been doing some work in terms of safeguarding because the council has issued thousands of devices to children and young people as part of that whole home education piece. And this may be children and young people who previously have only been online in a very supervised way at school and in a formal education setting, and may not have been online as much or at all at home, and perhaps think, well, suddenly there's freedom and I can do all sorts of things. But also the other group that I'm thinking about particularly is we work and have set up a network called the Aladdin Network with adults who have learning disabilities and or autism or both. And for adults with learning disabilities, especially the carers of those adults with learning disabilities are really, really concerned about their vulnerability and the things that they might be doing or saying or sharing once they become more digitally included and are accessing online spaces and, as you say, Facebook groups, chat rooms, messaging services, and so on and so forth. The approach that the 100% Digital Leeds team take is that, as I think Ali and Caroline have said, we understand digital inclusion and we understand things like online safety. What we're not the experts in is adults with learning disabilities or children and young people or older people with specific long-term health conditions. So we work with the organisations who are the experts in supporting those people. So across the Aladdin network, there are around 20 organisations who already support adults with learning disabilities. They support them in all kinds of aspects of their life, from supporting them in terms of volunteering or moving closer to employment, supporting them in terms of social activities, wider kind of building their confidence to engage with community settings, community venues, whether that's travel and transport around the city, so on and so forth. And so because those organisations already understand the potential vulnerabilities of those groups, but may not understand the impact and the vulnerabilities of those people doing those things in an online space, that's essentially, it's all about collaboration and partnership. So it's about 100% Digital Leeds, as I think Ali and Caroline have said, talking to the staff and the volunteers at those organisations so that those staff and volunteers can more effectively support the people in terms of online safety. And that's online safety in the round. So yes, it absolutely includes the things that you were saying, Councillor Cunningham, but it also includes things like, if this is the first time I've ever done online shopping, am I putting my bank card details into a safe and secure website? Or am I following a link in an email that's asking me to put my bank details in? All of that is a huge issue, and it's a huge issue particularly for people that have never been online before, and for some of the people that we're talking about who are already in vulnerable situations. And what we want is for digital inclusion to improve people's lives and make things easier for them, reduce the stress that they may be living under. We don't want increased digital inclusion to be yet another thing that they have to worry about, or yet another cause of stress and anxiety, either for the people or for their carers and their families. So it's absolutely an issue that we take really, really seriously, but it's absolutely about partnership. So it's about 100% Digital Leeds bringing our understanding of online safety and digital inclusion, working with the organisations that understand the people that we're talking about and how they might be vulnerable to those sorts of things. But it's absolutely an ongoing process, and it's an ongoing process as people become more digitally included. So one of the first things you might do, as you said, Councillor Cunningham, is post something on Facebook. Well, there's online safety around that. Then as you become more digitally included, you might start to do transactions and shopping and finances and so on and so forth. So yeah, it's never ending, but it's absolutely something that we take really seriously.
Thanks for that, Jason. Lou, do you want to come back?
No, thank you, Jason. That's really useful. Thank you.
Okay, Neil Buckley.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. There were just 2 or 3 things I wanted to bring up, actually. But it's fun, isn't it, that about 3 or 4 minutes ago, I got a text, and it was from the local medical centre saying, would I like my second jab at this or this time? So within about 10 seconds, I just pressed it, and hey presto, I'm going on Saturday at 4 o'clock. So it's amazing how far we've come with all this stuff, isn't it? And that was my first point, really, to say that before I say something else, this whole process of enabling people to go digital has been a fantastic piece of human progress, really. And I think every officer involved in trying to bring this process along deserves some credit for our local part in it. I've got one brief practical question, if I can, which is, when it's come to the providing of electronic equipment, laptops and all that kind of thing to various third sector organisations, and there have been hundreds and hundreds of these things now given away, provided, what safeguards exist at all for monitoring how they are? In other words, that a given number haven't been lost or dropped on the floor or whatever. And what is done to eventually decide that a given proportion have to be written off, and what happens then? That's a practical point. The other point really is just in conjunction with the remarks I was making about it being such a great thing, which it is. When all this is over, the situation we're in now, people will have to meet again. Human beings need to meet, don't they? And I've already had a situation in the council where an officer has suggested to me that, well, councillor, I think what we'll do is, instead of having X number of these meetings per annum, we'll have some of them continuing online. And some of them involving people who are not council officers. Now, I think this is entirely wrong, and that when we can get back to face in these situations, we should do. For instance, I think it was, I don't know whether it was Ali, who mentioned the online book group. Fantastic, that's great. But where possible, that should become an offline book group, an actual book group, shouldn't it? That would be my point there. And just on the subject of hospital and NHS appointments and so on, I think it was possibly Caroline who mentioned this, about the opportunity of having a doctor's appointment online. Well, I can tell you here, we don't have an opportunity. We've got no other choice. if you try to see the doctor, it's an impossibility. So I'd just like to make those comments, Chair, if I can, and I'd be interested in the responses.
Okay, Jason, do you want to start off by picking some of those points up, and then anyone else who wants to pitch in? And I should extend a welcome to Councillor Lewis, who joined us some minutes ago. Welcome, James. For those who don't recall, James was previously the portfolio holder for strategy and resources, and obviously has done a lot of work over the years with the Scrutiny Board around the whole theme of digital inclusion. So welcome, James.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt such an interesting item, but thank you for that introduction.
No, that's fine. Okay, Jason.
Certainly. Thank you, Councillor Buckley. To your first question around the devices and what happens with them and the security and so on and so forth. There are lots of different kinds of devices and lots of different kinds of schemes happening at the moment. So certainly the ones that I know the most about, I can answer those, and then other colleagues may chip in. I know Ali may have some understanding of what some of the neighbourhood networks are doing. So from a council perspective, the tablet lending scheme that we've had for a couple of years now, there are close to 1,000 iPads on this scheme now, with colleagues from across the council have bought iPads for specific cohorts of people. So just before Christmas, Employment and Skills bought 150 iPads to work with people on a European funded employment programme. Colleagues elsewhere have bought iPads for people who are clinically extremely vulnerable. The library service manages and administers this tablet lending scheme, and all of those iPads have security built in. So as soon as you switch them on, it says property of Leeds City Council, and we, the council, have control over those iPads. So if an iPad is lost or stolen, we can kill it. We can make it worthless, essentially. There's no point taking it to cash converters or to a car boot sale, because it won't work, because we can remotely access that device and lock it. And we have had, that scheme has been running for 2.5 years now. And we've, I think, had one iPad stolen. It found its way to Halifax, but it found its way back to Leeds, because whoever ended up with it in Halifax couldn't use it. And it says, because it said property of Leeds City Council, we had a phone call and we managed to get that one back. So from that perspective, none in terms of stolen and lost. We've had some at very small, single figures out of the 1,000 that we have on the scheme. Fewer than 10 have been damaged in any way, and that's just accident, dropped off a kitchen work surface, so on and so. The other devices that I know the most about are the laptops and tablets that have been given to children and young people through the Department for Education scheme. And I know that colleagues within the council in the Digital and Information Service, also in education, children and families, working with social work teams, there's around 11,000 devices that have come from the Department for Education that have gone into the homes of children and families who were offline. Conversations are ongoing at the moment about what happens to those devices, whether they are left within the homes for the children and young people to keep, or now that schools are starting to reopen and children are accessing education back at school now, whether those devices come back to the local authority or go into the schools to be used in case of further lockdowns or when bubbles burst and so on and so on. So I don't have numbers in terms of, I know 11,000 have gone out. I don't know how many might come back, what state they might be in when they do come back, whether they will come back to the council, to schools, or whether they will stay within people's homes, I'm not sure. But then what we also have seen is the growth in lending schemes amongst community organisations. And those community organisations, to the best of my understanding, are all managing them in slightly different ways because of the people that they're lending them to and the requirements for those different schemes. So in some cases, they're lending to people for a very long period of time because they knew those people were clinically vulnerable, shielding, and would need that device, would need that connection for months. In other cases, some of the schemes have lent them for a much shorter period of time because they were working on a fixed project. I'm not sure in terms of the security of those devices, the technical security, whether there's any software on them. But what I do know is that because those organizations essentially are lending to their members, they know the people that they're giving them to, and they're giving those devices to people for a specific purpose and for a specific length of time, and they know where those people live. They have those relationships. So it's much more about the person interaction rather than the technical software and anything that might be on the device. And I think that comes to your second point, Councillor Buckley, is it's around that, the online transaction and the virtual meeting and that virtual contact versus the physical. And I think it's conversation I know we've had at previous meetings, Councillor Buckley, is from 100% digital Leeds perspective, it should be a choice. It should always be a choice. I think the thing we've all experienced over the last 12 months is that it's been much less of a choice and it's been much more mandated. This is how you've had to do things digitally and remotely and virtually. And as we look forward, I think we would much more prefer that blended approach. And so an online book group, currently based in the library service and have great love for libraries, online book groups, absolutely. People being in a space and talking and meeting and having a coffee and a biscuit. But if there are a couple of people who would really like to join that book group, but have difficulties with transport or their health's not great that day, having the option for those people to dial in and access that book group virtually, it's that blended approach, I think, is what we would be looking to when we move forward. So that everyone has a choice. And for those people that want to meet face to face, absolutely that should be an option. But for people who still feel that digital is their preferred option or is a more convenient option, we wouldn't ever want to switch it off, I think, because then we're just mandating it in reverse, in the same way that we're sort of kind of complaining that it's been mandated in that way for the last 12 months. So yeah, but others may have views.
Thank you, Jason. No, I think you make an important distinction, and we should never have meetings online if, by dint of doing that, we're excluding people who, for whatever reason, can't engage, because that's the whole issue we're talking about. We would actually be perpetuating digital exclusion if we were to do that. On the other hand, I know as an individual, and others may be of a different view, that if I have meetings with officers, they are going to be online for two reasons. One, it is not a productive use of my time to spend hours every week driving backwards and forwards when those meetings can take place quite happily online. And secondly, and perhaps even more importantly, it would be adding to my carbon footprint unnecessarily if I could undertake those meetings online. So I think that's the distinction. If we're talking about wider meetings and engaging people, we don't want to be excluding them. And I think you're quite right, Neil. We should be ensuring that those meetings, as far as possible, are face-to-face, so no one's excluded. But I do think we have learned over the last year that there is real value in engaging online where that's appropriate, and we're not excluding anyone for the reasons that I described. I don't know if you want to come back, Neil.
It was just to more or less agree with that, to be honest. I think my fear is that we could be dragged into mission creep, and that everything becomes online as a norm, which I think will be personally a nightmare world. But if we can have face-to-face meetings where people do have the opportunity to come in digitally if they want, obviously that's perfectly reasonable, but not, I think, not to the exclusion of face-to-face. I think that would be a human disaster.
Yeah, I think in fairness, every discussion we've had and every report has always highlighted the need not to exclude people because they're not digitally connected, that we will do our utmost to facilitate that connection, to provide equipment and hopefully access to the data systems. But when all else fails, we've got to have that human alternative. And it's not just in the case of things like book clubs, but it's if people are wanting to report things or to engage with the council or other organisations. There's always got to be that human element to it. And I think, in fairness, you know, we have always emphasised that point, not just as a scrutiny board, but the officers have always done that in the reports that they've provided. Katie, and then I'll bring Leonardo in.
Hiya, thank you. Can I start just by saying a well done to everybody involved in this. It's such an important agenda, it really is, and it completely fits in this board's remit of inclusive growth. It really does. So we've heard some praise for so many people involved, and I think it's brilliant to see. It really is. So thank you, and may it continue. My question was about section 5 in the report, so it's probably coming to you, Jason, that one of the things discussed there is the idea of data poverty, and I know that's something that we've discussed before, and it's such an important issue that, you know, there's not much point having all these devices if you can't afford to get online with them. So I know you mentioned in the report the work that's being done by the Hubbub charity, and I know in the next report, there's reference to some of the centres that are being connected up with free Wi-Fi. We have talked previously about schemes in tower blocks, and I just wondered if there are any more updates or future plans to address that issue.
Thank you, Councillor Dye. The tower block schemes, I'm happy to get more information from colleagues in housing. My understanding is that we certainly trialled some things. Stephen may know more and may be able to chip in. We certainly trialled some masts on tower blocks that would give free access to the residents, and there were issues, I do know, and I believe those trials have stopped simply because of by the time you got to the lower floors, we were looking at boosts of things in corridors and things to try and get the signal to work, and it just wasn't as effective as we would have hoped. We've certainly had, in terms of the tower blocks and other properties, there was an offer during lockdown from a provider called Hyperoptic, which I'm not sure got a mention in the report, to be fair, but they were offering free connectivity to any family who was in a property where there was a Hyperoptic fibre cable running past the property. If that family had, again, it was back to that home education piece. If the family had children that were home educating, Hyperoptic would provide a free connection, I think, until the end of term. So there are things that are happening. We're currently talking to BT, and BT have the full fibre contract in the city. And as part of that contract, there is a social value element. So BT are working with housing colleagues and with the 100% Digital Leeds team to look at what some of those interventions might be. We're looking at the moment about whether there can be some free data for some of the schemes that we've just been talking about with Councillor Buckley. So some of the community organisations who have devices that they're lending, but may be struggling to pay the ongoing data connectivity for the SIM cards, whether BT can do something in that space. But I think ultimately what's needed and what's referenced in the report is a national solution to this. We can do things locally, and we are certainly trying. We have made some progress, but ultimately nationally, the internet service providers are being, I don't want to say they're being pressured, they're being brought around a table to have a conversation with MPs and others, because I don't think we're ever going to get to a point where data is just free. But what we would like to get to is a point where data is treated as a utility. So, you know, none of us can survive without water, but water is not free. People pay, but there are price plans, there are social tariffs, you do not get cut off if you miss a month. And I think what we'd like is for data to be treated in a similar way. And nationally, the Good Things Foundation, which is a national social digital inclusion charity, is bringing people together. What they're talking about a data poverty lab, and they're working with MPs on the all-party parliamentary group for data poverty, and they're working with organisations like Nominet and other colleagues. They're bringing together national providers and the internet service providers to have those discussions about because data poverty is absolutely an issue and it is going to be a growing issue moving forward. But I think needs to be tackled at a national level if we're going to have a sustainable solution to it. And so 100% Digital Leeds are part of those conversations. The first meeting of this data poverty lab hasn't been called yet, but we'll be part of that with Good Things Foundation, and we'll happily report back to future scrutiny boards. But I think if we're going to make sustainable progress at scale, I think we are looking at a national solution, and we're looking at all of the internet service providers to have those social tariffs so that people on low incomes pay less, people on very low incomes at least have an entry point. Whereas at the moment, even the most basic offers from these providers, they're £10 a month or in that region. And that's more money than some of the people we're talking about can afford at this stage.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. I'm reminded at the last general election, there was a party, I forget its name, that actually had a manifesto commitment to free broadband, but we'll park that for the time being. I think it is an absolutely crucial issue that Councillor Dye's raised, because we talk about poverty in its generality, and then we start digging down into particular areas like food poverty we've talked about for many years, and energy poverty we've talked about for many years. But actually data poverty is a relatively new concept, but absolutely critical to people's welfare and well-being, and it's something that has become highlighted over the course of the last year. Katie, do you want to come back on that?
Only to say, yeah, I think you're probably right. I think it is a national solution that's needed, and it's good to hear that you're in on those discussions, because I think, you know, with the work that Leeds has done as a city, that's absolutely where you should be. But just, I fear that even national solutions don't have all the answers, do they? I mean, we have national solutions for electricity tariffs, and it still means that poorer people pay the most. So,
that's exactly going to be my point, Councillor Dye. Yeah, those that can least afford it end up paying the most. They're on the higher tariffs, they're on pay as you go, they get less data for their money. Yeah, it's the same.
Yeah, I'm going to bring Leonardo. Sorry, Katie, did you want to?
No, I was just saying thank you. I'm going to put my hand down.
Okay, I'm going to bring Leonardo in because I know he's got views on this particular issue, but he indicated some time ago, and I think he probably wants to go back to some of the other discussions that we've had previously. Leonardo.
Yeah, thank you very much. And so in terms of tablets, first of all, we are shortly, i.e. this month, going to have a review of how we provision tablets and what type of tablets we provision, because I think there are alternatives where we can reach out to more people in terms of providing that digital inclusion which is required. And so we will, and really the idea is to build a strategy of how we continue the provision of tablets. It's not a vehicle that will replace human contact of face-to-face, but it's an enabler. And if nothing else, we want to make sure that people have it instead of people not having it and not being able to actually connect, right? So that's the first important thing. So whether we will use iPads in the future or not, so that is up for conversation, together with things like supportability, monitorability, safety, the software that we have installed both on tablets and laptops. So that will form a new paper which the teams will be starting to work on this month. And just to give a little bit of reassurance to the earlier point, they're not meant to replace. I see them like a human contact. They are meant to enhance it or to allow the human contact where you can't have it. So let's treat it as such if we can, please. In terms of data poverty, there's some things which were mentioned there. So one of the things I'm really keen is that we get more of a commercial focus when it comes to the way we deal with some of the suppliers, particularly like BT and others, these internet service providers, this big telco, because we are talking to BT, that's true, as Jason said, and I've been in a number of conversations with Tom as well, and there are definitely more things that they can do. And in some cases, it's also about finding a way to put a supplier to work, perhaps in inverted comma, against another supplier to the benefits of the citizens. So typically you will find that BT gives you an offer for £10, but if you were to join Skype for a limited period of time, you get it for £2.50. So if you can get it for £2.50, just to move, why can't I get the £2.50 straight away? Right, so there are conversations which are ongoing at the moment with BT, which I'm personally involved in terms of you need to do more, actually, because in some cases you're kidding ourselves, because we know that if you want to grab customers, you will lower the prices. So there's something about council staff, technology members to get more savvy in those conversations, which we are definitely driving, which is definitely a task to lower those tariff, right? And I see that almost like a better opportunity at the moment, instead of trying other devices on mass, etc., which we did try, but we end up to have problems with as Jason mentioned, with reception, and therefore we'll start to add additional devices to boost signals, and we end up spending even more, which that is not always the solution. And connected to that, I have to say, there are even some businesses and some areas in the city where there is no connectivity. There are some lawyers which have reached out to myself about not having connectivity whatsoever in some area of Leeds. And that's something we are also following up and trying to influence not only BT, but also the network providers to actually prioritize perhaps Leeds and the surrounding, and that becomes a wider conversation in terms of why that region versus other part of England. But certainly we are trying that as well. So hopefully a combination of all of those will start and to lower the tariff, or certainly will move us more towards that future. But I would say it's a work in progress. It's something that we have to build iteratively and incrementally. It doesn't happen overnight. So we constantly have to go back and challenge, hence why I put the point of we need to actually sometimes have a commercial position with some of this telco to bring out the best for Leeds, for our cities, and for people which are in needs. And that's something I personally want to invest on. So just wanted to reflect on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Leonardo. I think we all welcome the explicitly robust approach that you're taking to this challenge. Mohammed.
Thank you, Chair. I welcome the report and all the work that has been done to make Leeds digitally inclusive for everyone. But I've got a couple of questions. It's been mentioned that the neighbourhood networks have done great work, and I sit on one of the boards, and I know they have done great work to get the people that maybe the ones in the older generation to get them digitally active. But what happens to those people that are not members of neighbourhood networks? What are we doing to get in touch with them and get them digitally active? And also, it was mentioned that during the lockdown, obviously lots of school children who did not have access to digital devices struggled to keep up with the work. And what is being planned for the future, where any other pandemic, or even if this goes into another lockdown with COVID, what are we doing to get those children acclimatized to using digital devices because they don't have access to them, and making sure that they are able to work on things like Microsoft Teams and Zoom and other digital platforms that they obviously don't necessarily get the education for in school, or they don't have the access for at home because they don't have digital devices. So I was just wondering what is being done regards that. And the other thing is there's language barriers. What is being done to get those that have language issues? Because I think digital platforms are a bit like music. everybody can kind of enjoy them. It doesn't matter where you're from. But the only thing is this is if everything is in one language, and those that have issues accessing certain, whether it's Zoom or because of the way everything is set out or the way the instructions are, what is being done to address that, or is there any special sort of classes taking place for those that are from those, say, BAME backgrounds or from any other background that actually struggle with English as a first language?
Okay, thanks, Mohammed. Who's going to start off with that? Jason? Or
I'm happy to, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, Jason.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the questions, Councillor Mohammed. I think the first point is a really good one. So the 100% digital Leeds approach is to work with organisations across the city who are working already with people who are digitally excluded and excluded for all kinds of other reasons. I think it's a really good point, well taken. What about people who are not being reached by those organisations? And you mentioned from a neighbourhood network perspective, but there may well be people who are not being reached by organisations that we currently work with. I think what we need to do, therefore, is to redouble our efforts to work with even more organisations, so that the people that you mentioned who are not part of a neighbourhood network may be part of, they may have caring responsibilities. So they may be reached by Carers Leeds, for example, and we work with Carers Leeds. They might have health conditions, so they might be accessing GP and health and care services. So it's about us making sure that 100% digital Leeds is working through those health and care services so that we can reach those people. It may be that they're accessing a food bank. That may be the only service that they access. But again, if we, and we have worked with food banks, if 100% digital Leeds is working with any and every organisation that's having some intervention and some interaction with the people that we're talking about, then those organisations, those volunteers, those staff across all of those different organisations can start to have that digital inclusion conversation as part of the wider work that they're doing. Whether that work, as I say, is providing food, providing shelter, providing benefits, whatever it may be. So I think it's a good point, well taken, that we still absolutely have not reached everyone, but we need to keep doing more in terms of the way that we're working. The piece around the question around children and young people, that work is ongoing, and it's interesting that the conversation is shifting slightly. So there's a meeting in a couple of weeks that unfortunately 100% digital Leeds can't attend because we're all otherwise booked, but we are talking to colleagues, council officers from the school improvement team. That's a meeting that's been called by the West Yorkshire Combined Authority. So there are education leads from across the region, from Bradford, Wakefield, Kirklees, Colesdale, and Leeds is represented at that meeting. And the meetings started, I think this is maybe the second or third of those, where the conversations was very much around getting devices to those children, young people and families. And the conversations are shifting now, exactly to your point, Councillor, which is much more around the content of the learning. What are they using these devices for? Are the teachers and the staff in schools in a place where they can deliver those? And again, back to Councillor Buckley's questions around that blended learning approach. So fine, now that children and young people are coming back to schools and face-to-face learning is happening more, but there's still going to be children who, because of their personal health or because bubbles break down and so on and so forth, there needs to be that blended learning. And the conversations that are happening in a couple of weeks are much more around what does education look like, rather than has somebody got a device? Yes, they've now got a device, but exactly to your point, can they use these online educational platforms? Can they use some of the tools that we're talking about? And are teachers in a place where they can support those children and young people to access this blended learning and to make best use of those platforms? So those conversations are absolutely ongoing at a regional level as well as a city level, and Leeds is represented at those West Yorkshire Combined Authority conversations. And the final point around people for whom English is not a first language, this is work, again, that we have been doing on the 100% digital Leeds team, where, as the models that we've heard earlier, where we've been bringing those organisations together. So we work really closely with colleagues in the Migrant Access Project and the Migrant Access team within the council. language hubs, and third sector organisations who support people for whom English is not their first language. And again, it's about those organisations having that understanding of those communities, not just from a language perspective, but from a cultural perspective, and ensuring that the digital inclusion interventions that we're talking about are appropriate and effective for those different communities and in their first language. So again, from a 100% Digital Leeds perspective, we can bring the digital inclusion expertise, but we might not have that level of understanding of those different communities. So it's about us working with those organisations. And Amy on my team led some work where, again, we brought these people together for a funding bid. We didn't get the funding, but what has happened is that we have those relationships now with organisations from Leeds Asylum Seekers Support Network through to Unleashing Refugee Potential, through to HARP, through to PAFRAS, a range of organisations that support asylum seekers, migrants, refugees, and people within settled communities within the city, but for whom English is not their first language. And what we find across lots of the communities and the people that we've been talking about through this meeting, digital inclusion is, and digital exclusion, should I say, is one more barrier that these people are already facing. And those barriers may be language, they may be financial, they may be disability, health, and so on and so on and so on. And digital exclusion is just one more barrier and one more challenge that people are facing in their lives. So, but the reverse is also true. Digital inclusion can be a way to break down some of those other barriers, from social inclusion through to financial inclusion, and so on and so on. So we absolutely, I take the point, all 3 points that you made, Councillor, but we are working in each of those spaces to try and address those.
Okay, thank you, Jason. I don't know if anyone else wants to pitch in. If not, I will do from the chair. Oh, Mary, go on.
Thank you, Chair. I think just some final comments, really. I think it's shown that the work that the team are doing is both varied and far-reaching, and not just about making sure people have got kit, you know, helping people for bids to get grants, etc. And to be recognised nationally is great, you know, and shows that Leeds is leading on this. And the work that's being carried out right across the city is absolutely fantastic. So I'd just like to say thank you to the team, to Leonardo and Justin. You know, very proud of the achievements that we've got so far and the recognition, but we know that there's still a lot of work to do. And because of the importance, such as, you know, data poverty and stuff, it's a shame that the Chancellor didn't specifically mention this in his budget, but with that, I'll leave it. Thank you. But well done, team. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks very much for those comments, Mary. I think the board members have asked most of the questions that I got listed, but there are just two connected questions that I'd like to finish off with. And one is about the sustainability of the 100% digital initiative. I mean, clearly, this core funding comes from the council, and we all know the pressures we're under as a local authority and have been for some years in terms of funding. The second major source, of course, is the money that's levered in from outside from a number of different sources through partnerships with third sector and other public sector organisations. So I just wonder how far we can be given an assurance as a scrutiny board, for whom this has been an enormous priority, and it's very gratifying to see how things have developed over the years, how that sustainability, as far as is possible and feasible, is being built in. And I suppose a second subsidiary point is this: in my long experience of local government or the public sector, whenever an authority or an organisation develops a groundbreaking, trailblazing, leading role, lots of its peers beat a path to its door to kind of absorb its expertise, and that in itself can become quite an exhausting process. And I think, just to crystallise my question, hopefully that work, which is important as a value, but is not taking people away from the day job. Leonardo.
So thank you again. My priority is to restructure the digital teams, and I'm in the process of doing that between Council and CCG. And I'm about to announce this week or next week the first phase of that in terms of restructuring the SLP. In answer to your question, the new digital structure as 100% digital as a team incorporated in the new structure. As well, it has a small element of innovation as well, which would be connected to it. So that gives reassurance that it is actually becoming part of a new digital team formally as a structure, instead of existing by, I suppose, trying to get funds on a regular basis. So there's definitely that reassurance for this financial year that they are there. Of course, I can't predict what happens in the future. But definitely they are there as a team, and it is being recognized their values and the value that they can continue to provide. So I can give you that reassurance. Secondly, on the second point mentioned, we have been working quite rapidly in establishing transparency in everything that the digital team works on. And we are now publishing a dashboard on a monthly basis. That dashboard is evolving, and behind the scene, there is a lot of work which has been done on prioritization and also on resources allocation to projects and activities. So I would just answer to your second point, if I may, saying that will become more and more visible, so that anybody will be able to see what the technology guys in the new team are actually working on, whether it is 100% digital, whether it is other activity or projects, and that is will be reviewed on a monthly basis. So there will be a time where we have to prioritize, but I would say with my answer on the first point, that the team will exist. There will be an opportunity to have that visibility on a monthly basis. And if there are issues which might arise from that, we will pick them up. But at this moment in time, I'm reserving a capacity specifically to this point, which therefore will give that reassurance for this financial year, but also will give visibility in terms of those are the resources allocated to 100% digital, and only that Innovation Smart City is connected to that. And therefore, that is a kind of a ring-fenced capacity for those activities. I can't promise in the future that we might not do some reprioritization, but what I can promise is that I will make it very visible.
Okay, right. Thanks very much, Leonardo. Okay, well, I think I can, in the absence of any other indication of contributors, bring that particular agenda item to a close. I think, as always, we've had a very comprehensive and far-reaching discussion about this particular issue. So that takes us on to agenda item 8. No need to ask anyone to reintroduce themselves because we've got the same people who are in attendance. I suppose one thing that strikes me from the chair over the last, sorry, Ali, were you indicating you wanted to speak?
No, I think if you've moved on from 100% digital Leeds, it's time for me to go.
Yes, and Caroline, obviously, if you wish to leave as well. But thank you very much for your attendance. It was an invaluable contribution. Thank you both.
Bye.
Okay, so as I've been chair for the last few years, I mean, some of the issues that we've already addressed in the previous report, but especially in this one, I mean, I think even just a short time ago would almost have fallen into the realms of science fiction, but now they're here today and or tomorrow. And I think it is quite enlightening. I mean, I think the important thing is that we continue to roll out these particular facilities. I think the other important thing is how we make data and technology our servant and not our master. How we ensure, and I think Stephen will be talking about this, we make that data easily available to the citizens as part of the democratic process, and how we ensure, and again this touches on a point that we've made previously in the discussions, that that the data is trusted and the way of collecting it is trusted and secure. So, Stephen, I think you're leading off on this, are you?
I am, yes. Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, everybody. Not sure how I follow the last discussion. That was a really good one, but I'll try my best. So this is an updated report following the discussion that we had last February in 2020, and provides an update of some of the projects and programs that we might label as smart city initiatives. I mean, just to be clear, the Smart Leeds program is a kind of an umbrella overarching program that leads on some areas of work, but also tries to join the dots up of other projects that are taking place in services and departments across the organisation, and try and break those out of silos, if you like. As an introduction and as a reminder, following on from that last report, the Smart Leeds programme focuses on two main areas. First of all, the foundations, the building blocks, if you like, that we need in place in order to do all the good stuff on top. And I'll come to those in just a moment. And then also our priority areas, not necessarily exclusively these, but focusing on areas such as health and well-being, climate emergency, housing standards, and also travel and transport. And again, I'll come back onto that in just a moment. Just going through the report then, Section 3, first of all, references the city digital strategy that we're currently working on. Now, this is a new piece of work since the last report. A number of cities around the UK, such as Glasgow, London, Manchester, for example, are also working on their city digital strategies. And this was born out of references, for example, in inclusive growth, where we want to promote Leeds as a digital city, and we want to ensure that we have the right 21st century infrastructure. And I guess our thinking is that this digital strategy would almost support and underpin strategies such as inclusive growth, climate emergency, and health and well-being, those three pillars. And what we've done since around September, October last year, we've held a number of workshops. These have been open public workshops where we've invited companies, members of the public and others from across the district and beyond, I have to say as well, to contribute on what our priority areas for this strategy should focus on, and what the actions should be that we would look at in order to address those priorities. So just to give you a very brief rundown of where we're up to so far, the first workshop that we did focused on digital economy and skills. And what was really interesting, I have to say, with that first one, and just picking up on the discussion that we've just had with digital inclusion, in each of those workshops, we then break into four different breakout sessions with relevant parties having a further, more detailed discussion about each of those, each of the four topic areas. And in the digital economy and skills one, we had one focusing on digital economy, which is fair enough, and then the other three, one of them was on digital inclusion, and we're asking the question, what are we doing now that we should do more of? What are we maybe doing that we need to stop and we're wasting our efforts, perhaps? Or what are other cities, what are other places around the UK and around the world doing that maybe we should consider and maybe adopt and bring here? So those are the kind of questions we have in those breakout sessions. And like I say, the three of those breakout sessions on this first workshop focused on digital inclusion, teaching and learning, and we were looking there specifically more at sort of school age and up to secondary and higher education, and then also employment and skills. And what was really notable from each of those, of the feedback that we got from those, is that there are clear overlaps in all of those areas, and no matter where you start your digital journey, you might say, whether you're retired and getting online for the first time, or whether it's some simple coding at school, or whether it's something that you're picking up throughout within your work. You know, our digital journey does not end the moment you start. And really, you know, technology changes, more data is collected, you're giving away more data. And it's important that, you know, our own skills, whether it's within the workforce or whether it's, you know, outside of work and doing things for ourselves, we need to ensure that our own skills continually adapt to what is going on in terms of the progression of technology and how data is managed. And that was really, really, really interesting. The other thing, and I'll come back onto it in just a moment, you know, we were talking there about, you know, sort of looking after, you know, getting online and then doing the right thing and ensuring that, you know, we don't fall into the traps and all the rest of it. That can happen to anybody. I stupidly clicked on a link a few weeks ago on Facebook, and before I knew it, I was hacked. And then there's emails being sent from my account, you know, and that then other people click on that link and they get hacked, and so goes on the chain. It really can happen to anybody. And, you know, it's important that we do have the, you know, not just get people online, but then have a good experience of being online. This shouldn't just be a case of, right, you're online, off you go. It's then ensuring that they have a good experience once they do that, and they don't get hacked or their data gets, you know, stolen at the first opportunity. So that's really, really important. In terms of the other workshops, and I won't dwell too much on them, that we focused on was innovation. The second one that we did just before Christmas. I'll come back to that towards the end, because a larger piece of work taking place there. Just after Christmas, we looked at smart cities. So Internet of Things, for example, you know, more devices that enable us to collect more data in real time. And then the final one we had just a few weeks ago focused on health and well-being, clearly because we have a specific strategy there, of course, on one of our pillars, but also a large you know, health sector in Leeds, and I think worthy of a discussion in its own right. And we're also doing a fair amount of work in that space already. The final workshop, and I think potentially one of the more interesting ones, and probably most important ones that we've got lined up for the 19th of April, is focusing on cyber challenges, cyber security, safety online, and that's for everyone. I mean, that was born out of a parent saying, I don't know what my child, you know, has access to, and all the rest of it. But it's safety, as I've just mentioned, safety online for all of us. It's so easy to click on a link or there's a text message going around at the moment saying if you need to contact the Royal Mail, because if you don't click on this link, we'll hold your parcel. You won't get your parcel. There is no parcel. You know, it's a scam, and it's important that people are aware of that. So safety online. And then finally, digital and data ethics. And this is absolutely fundamental to what we do going forward. It's important that when we're working on some of these projects in the future, what we might label smart city projects, that we go in eyes wide open, that we're absolutely clear what data are we collecting and for what purpose, who has access to it, where is it being shared. But we don't want to end up, you know, in even 5 years' time. I had a conversation with I forget the name, CPNI, and I forget what the acronym stands for. They're part of MI5 basically, and really promoting you know, safety in terms of security, both personnel, buildings, and cyber, and the three areas there. And they're, you know, they're really clear. This is an absolute area that we need to be looking at and thinking about the future as well. They're looking now at what are the cyber challenges in 10 years' time? Are we collecting data? Are we even opening up data at the moment that somebody in 5 years' time with some new technology can unpick it in ways that you can't currently unpick it now? And CPNI and MI5 are currently looking into that. They highlighted a really interesting example actually, where, and this was a government, you know, government funded and government backed initiative where they'd worked with Manchester Manchester to open up some utilities data. And it was to identify really the most valuable pieces of land in Manchester, and part of that was understanding what was going on under the roads and what the utilities were and how they were connected to these spare pieces of land. Well, of course, by opening up that, and it was opened up as open data, a threat, a rogue state, you might say, can then see the makeup of Manchester and where to target, in the future. So we need to be really, really mindful. Yes, we want to promote open data. Yes, we want to work with others and do the right thing. But we need to be really mindful about how we go about that. So I think that'd be a really, really, important and useful conversation on the 19th of April that will feed into this strategy. So that's the digital strategy that we're working on, and the idea is that we'll, following these public workshops, then we'll do some internal workshops as well to sort of validate our discussions, and then hopefully over the summer sort of pull all that together, and by the autumn then be able to report back on the first draft of that. That's the plan for that one. In terms, just going back, in terms of the Smart Leeds programme, and section 4 focuses on the foundations. This covers areas connectivity, data and analytics, and also digital inclusion, as we've talked about there, so I won't go over that one again. Connectivity covers, for example, and I believe gets reported to this board as well, the full fibre rollout, so you'll no doubt be familiar with that one. There's also, as both Leonardo and Jason mentioned, in terms of the social aspect of that full fibre rollout, the conversations with BT, and also some a small sort of project in terms of 5G in the city centre, and how we can look at use cases and understand how 5G can help us in the future. I believe that's all being worked up at the moment. We might come on to it later. Obviously, the rollout of free Wi-Fi in community buildings, we talked about that last year as well. We've ended up rolling that out to 21 buildings, in fact, rather than 20. Obviously, they've not been in use over the past 12 months, but I think that's been a success in supporting the digital inclusion work and ensuring that people can get online in various communities where there was limited access in the past. And also LoRaWAN, so that stands for Long Range Wide Area Network. So that is a very simple network that we use some of the business rates pool funding that was to be used for connectivity. So we use a small amount of money from that. There's about £10,000 from that, and also working with Munro K, and I'll come on to the work that we're doing with Munro K, owners of White Rose Business Park in the future. They also financed further funding to expand that network as well. So we're building this Leeds innovation network that will then allow us to deploy Internet of Things devices, and we've had some independent testing done on that network at no cost to the council. That's basically proven that we've got one of the best LoRaWAN networks in the UK in terms of its density for the area of the district, and that will support, for example, use cases such as air quality monitoring in more locations. It could be used for gully monitoring, so we can work out when a grate is blocked. It could be for housing monitoring, so we can understand whether a property is becoming damp over a period of time. And I'll go into that project in a little bit more detail in a moment as well. So lots of opportunities. Once we have the network there, then lots of opportunities to collect data in real time in the future. And as things stand at the moment, that is it's an open network. So again, in terms of encouraging others to innovate, encouraging businesses to come to Leeds and invest and do innovative stuff here, that network is currently open. And whether that will remain so in the future, that's sort of a discussion down the line, but we would certainly want to retain some of it as being open to encourage that sort of innovation from third parties as well. So lots of work going on in that space. Data and analytics, this is something that Leonardo might want to touch on a little bit later on perhaps, but you'll be familiar that we have the Data Mill North website, where over the last 6, 7, 8 years, we've been a leader in terms of really pushing forward on the open data agenda, working with the likes of ODI Leeds, for example, and working with the local digital community to reuse that data to develop new and innovative services that could support some of council services that I've mentioned in the report. We've also last year done some discovery work that looked at what our next generation data mill looks like in terms of better data sharing. Should it just be open data? Should it also consider closed data? Maybe even recharge for some data. There might be some value in data as well. Who has access to that and all the rest of it? And how is that architected? That will be rolled in to the work that Leonardo is leading on in terms of the creation of a city office of data analytics, where that team will not only look at the future city data platform, but then also better understand that data, better work with that data to provide a better insight, and that can help us with better data-led decision making in the future. And that might be something that Leonardo perhaps wants to touch on later on. So they're the foundation. So, like I said, if we get the data right, and if we get the connectivity right, and if we get the skills piece right, then we can build all the good stuff on top. And the smart city priority areas, like I say, the program is more an overarching program. So in the report, I've just included some projects that are going on. I would say not limited to all of these projects. These are examples of what you might label a smart city project. Similar activity going on in other cities as well. Health and well-being, for example, we mentioned Loop, and again, that's so Loop is about bringing data together from the third sector into one place. So it's about collecting and storing the data once and using many times, rather than the current situation where it's collect many times, store many times, and use many times. So that means that third sector organizations that are collecting that kind of data for themselves are all collecting it all over the place. So which is the correct version of the truth if you have multiple versions of the same data? And Loop is about bringing all that together, and then organizations such as Forum Central, for example, or Voluntary Action Leeds can take a feed from that data, and everybody is accessing the same data, and it's just one repository that is updated. So you have more faith in that data, and the data quality is improved. Other areas, as I mentioned, climate emergency, I mentioned in the report, such as Leeds Pipes that's been rolled out, that we might reference as a smart city example, as a smart city project. That is really, as you'll be familiar, that is, Leeds is really leading the way on that in terms of the district heating network. Travel and transport, I know my colleagues in highways, so this is where I think the Smart Leeds program really does sort of build on activity of work that's taking place already, and potentially would have been taking place in silos. So I mentioned in the report about the Vivacity Labs cameras. So as part of the changes to the highways in the city centre that's taking place at the moment, they're installing around 100 of these cameras that will enable highways to better manage traffic flows around the city centre. The cameras are essentially nothing special really, but it's the technology, it's the software that then interprets the images from those cameras where the clever stuff takes place. However, those cameras can also be used there's no, by the way, there's no facial recognition, but it's just monitoring bodies, if you like. But those cameras can also be used for footfall monitoring as well, and really enhance the offer that we have at the moment with Springboard, where we have 8 footfall monitors in very fixed locations. And as the city centre has expanded with, for example, Victoria Gate and Trinity, people navigate around the city in different ways. So it's debatable whether those 8 Springboard monitors are in the right place anymore. But these Vivacity Labs monitors provide much more opportunities to understand footfall around the city centre. And it's the fact that we have, in Smart Leeds, we have connections right across the organisation that's enabled us to sort of join those dots up. And finally, I'll just touch on housing standards, and this was mentioned at the meeting that we had last year. One of the major projects as part of the Housing Standards and Housing of the Future programme is the GovTech Catalyst project, which is a £1.25 million government-funded project, whereby in 2019 we worked with 5 suppliers to do 3 months worth of discovery work, and focusing on the challenge of how can we use technology to better manage our housing stock that could also in turn lead to improved health outcomes of our tenants. So if you live in a good quality accommodation, then the likelihood is that your health and well-being is likely to be improved as well. So the first 3 months of phase 1 focused on that research and development phase, really, and enabling those 5 suppliers that we were working with to get under the skin, get into the nitty-gritty of the problem from a tenant point of view. So they interviewed tenants and reached out to tenant groups to understand from their perspective, but also speaking to members of staff as well. Following further discussions with Government Digital Service, who are part of Cabinet Office and are leading on that project, they felt that it was a worthwhile project to take forward to phase 2. And then following a further application and interview process, we then whittled that down to 2 companies who are now just in the new year started phase 2, who are then continuing to some degree with that tenant interaction initially, picking up from phase 1, and then will then start to deploy technology to test and trial their technology in tenant homes, and there's that engagement taking place at the moment, that installation. And the idea there is then, and the second half and on the lead up to Christmas, the idea with this sort of innovation project is, that's for the suppliers, if you like, to then make the business case to us that £1 of investment equals X pounds of savings or efficiencies, and this can help you be proactive in terms of maintenance of those properties. Also, you may be aware there's a particular issue at the moment with no win, no fee lawyers targeting some of our tenants on Facebook and the like, to go around and do let's say a damp test, and that, often we don't know there's a problem until the solicitor contacts us, and that's an extra cost that that needs to be factored in as well. So you've got that added cost on top of the maintenance bill as well. So if we can be proactive, if we can understand when a house is slowly deteriorating and before it gets to a point where it becomes a small problem to a major issue, and we can target our increasingly limited resources in the right way, then that's a really good use of that technology, and it's for those suppliers to make that business case to us on the lead up to to the end of the year, and then that is something that we can take forward potentially and go through the usual procurement process at that point. So that's I'll move on then to the final stage. Like I say, that's the sort of the Smart Leeds program in a nutshell. Finally, section 6 in the report, I think this was just referenced a couple of paragraphs in last year's report, and things have moved on in terms of the work to utilise the White Rose Business Park as an innovation space. And that was included in the Morley Towns Fund, of which £1.9 million has been allocated to that project. And the idea here is that a smart city IoT innovation space would be refitted in the existing building. So that will provide the council with a flexible, like I say, innovation space that we will manage and operate. And again, you know, no direct cost to the council on that one. And that's where we'll be able to coordinate future innovation activity in that space. The fact that we're utilising the wider White Rose site as well means that in terms of testing and trialing technology where applicable and where that site fits, we can use that site and I guess overcome some of the barriers that we might experience, for example, planning and highways barriers that we might come across in more public spaces. That means that we can speed up that innovation and test and trial technology in that safe and controlled environment, coordinated from that new smart cities space within the White Rose. Additionally, and again, supporting some of the discussions that we've had previously this morning, it will also include a sort of a digital learning space as well. So there'll be classrooms where, for example, in discussion with Amazon Web Services, who host their own digital in-person digital courses. And the idea is that they have a restart 12-week program, and they have about 25 people on each course. And going through that program, they then work with partners and others to try and get the attendees employment at the end of that course. So there's those opportunities there. Not alone, there's other companies do similar stuff as well, and our Employment and Skills Service are also keen on getting involved and promoting some of the work that they do out of that space as well. And then finally, it will also offer co-working and hot desking space in a part of the city that has not really traditionally been focused on digital and technology. So it's really moving some of that, from the city centre and out to the Morley area. And again, that funding will also provide some opportunity to get some equipment installed, some technology as part of that offer. So, for example, 3D printers, VR equipment, where startups and SMEs can access that equipment that can help them build their, build their businesses further. And also, that equipment would also support our innovation work as well. So, at the moment, where we stand with that is we're currently working with City Development and the Morley Towns guys to work up the business case, look at metrics, how many people do we want to get through that education side, how many challenges would we work on a year, what are the right challenges to focus on, of course, how would we engage with various services and other actors around the city, and what would be that innovation pathway from identification of challenge right through to procurement, and how do we get there at the end. And ultimately, this is not about delivering, running lots and lots of pilot projects, and in my experience, if you call something a pilot, it generally ends up being a pilot and doesn't really go anywhere. This is about, one eye on the prize. How can we better use data, better use technology, really understand that technology as well, because that gives us an opportunity to get, like we're doing with GovTech, to really understand the technology so that we can lead to that procurement. We can help us write the business case to access funding wherever that may be, lead to a procurement with the thorough understanding that we know what we're procuring, we understand the technology, and we've already proven the business case, as I said earlier, that £1 of investment equals X pound of savings and efficiencies. So that's the idea there. And I think I've just about covered everything that I wanted to for now. So apologies if I've gone on a little bit too long, but I'll pause there and I'll open up for questions. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. Neil, with your indulgence, I'm going to bring Councillor Cunningham in because she did flag up a question in our pre-meeting that she wanted to ask. So, Lou.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Stephen. Mine's a fairly specific question and relating to 4.1.6. There's just a comment really as well. I think that now we're using retirement life schemes, not sheltered housing schemes within the council. But my question is quite specific, really, just to double check. I note with thanks that 2 of the retirement life schemes within Armley are included on this list. Please, could I check with you, have these schemes been rolled out already? Just that I've had contact with the chair of one of the residents groups of one of the buildings, and she hasn't got full awareness of this scheme, and I don't recall as a ward member having had any communications about it either to share. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cunningham. In terms of the sheltered housing, yes, apologies for that. That's my mistake, and I appreciate that we're using, we call that retirement life now. That's I think probably that was taken off a previous list, and I should have updated that. So apologies on that one. In terms of the 2 at Armley, are they listed on that? Are they listed there on that list?
They are. One's Burnsall Court and one's Sir Carl Cohen.
Okay, it is my understanding that everything on that list has now been rolled out, so I can chase that up. And we were in touch with the retirement life guys to promote the fact that those installations have taken place. So if you leave that with me, Councillor, I will check up that those have been installed. But it is my understanding that all of those on that list have completed, and I will get back to you directly and give you an update on that.
Thank you. And linked in with that, Stephen, just in terms of the selection of buildings for the rollout, have we got any data on the numbers of residents who had Wi-Fi access prior to rollout, and what and what effects therefore that has had upon those residents?
I don't have that data, but it's something that I can get hold of, and certainly, I mean, I might put a reference on there that some of the usage stats, obviously, for some of the community centres, we wouldn't have. In terms of the retirement life, I will get that information for you. We worked very closely with the retirement life team at the time to identify the buildings that we should focus on. And just to give you a little bit of background there in terms of how we arrived at those particular buildings, first of all, we focused on our priority neighbourhoods. Secondly, we looked at buildings that were Leeds City Council owned, because there were some put forward that weren't Leeds City Council owned, and that would have made it would have increased the cost or made it more difficult to install in those community locations as well. And then thirdly, it was where there was already a line into those buildings. Again, we had some buildings, for example, there was one at a pavilion in a park. So it was basically a building in the middle of the park, and that would have been more costly than the £5,000 that we had allocated for the installation of Wi-Fi in each of those buildings. So that's how we arrived at the list. In terms of the stats, in terms of usage, I don't have that to hand, but I will get that again. I will seek that out and I will get that for you.
Oh, thank you. I'd be really interested in those kind of before and after statistics in particular. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you, Lou. Neil Buckley.
Yes, thanks, Chair. And hearing what Stephen said about MI5, I think he needs to be careful. I think if he suddenly disappears and we never see him again, we'll know what's happened. He'll have been digitally cancelled. I just had a couple of questions, Chair, if I can. And at 428, the council being viewed as a trusted organisation when it comes to managing the citizens' data. And it sounds a little bit like something out of Deutschland 83, doesn't it? East Germany and all that. So if he could give me some reassurances that that's not the case. And then just at the Internet of Things, which sounds a bit similar actually, but devices such as air quality monitors to collect real-time data, could that also be used quickly to produce something like, say, a congestion charge?
Okay, I'll think that second one through in just a moment. I'll get my brains going a moment. But yeah, first of all, I think, you know, in terms of the data ethics, and that's why we're saying this workshop on the 19th, I think is increasingly important. You know, we in terms of the projects, these sort of innovation projects and how we, you know, increasingly collect data in the future. So for example, you know, with the housing project and the fact that we might be installing monitors in council houses that tell us the humidity and temperature, that kind of stuff in council houses. It's important that, you know, as a foundation, if you like, that we have the trust from our customers, from our citizens, from our tenants, that we manage their data in the right way. I think I would probably say there's maybe a certain amount of data skepticism, if that's a phrase, around at the moment. People are skeptical of data that's being collected and who has access to it and who's doing what with it and all the rest of it. And I think we need to, do more. I think we are a trusted organisation in terms of managing the data, and I think we do things in the right way, but that doesn't necessarily mean to say that we don't need to do more to convince some of our citizens, perhaps. And I think, you know, increasingly, as we collect data in new and innovative ways, we need to do more of that to say, you know, Leeds City Council, working with partners, have the same moral and ethical values that we have. You know, we are collecting data for all the right reasons. This is how we go about it, and this is ultimately so that we can deliver improved services for you and improved outcomes for our citizens. And I think that is will need to be an ongoing discussion, you know, and the conversations that we're having as part of that GovTech project at the moment is, you know, speaking to tenants to almost, I don't know if convince is the right word, but, you know, reassure our tenants that the data that we are collecting is for good and for all the right reasons, and this will improve the service that we can offer in the future. And I think, you know, we will have we will have very similar conversations on other projects in the future, no doubt. But I think those are very, you know, in terms of data and digital ethics, they are the foundations as an organisation that we need to put in place, really, and also assume, you know, or at least ensure that those same digital and data ethics apply to other organisations that we're working with on these projects as well. In terms of the air quality monitoring, I'm not sure about the congestion charging. There'd need to be another piece of the puzzle there, I think, somewhere in terms of, I guess, identifying vehicles, and that be ANPR and something like that. That is not to say that, again, collecting the data on this, you know, a future data platform, for example, and bringing all that data together enables us to do lots of new and innovative stuff in the future. future as well. So it might be, for example, that we collect air quality data at various parts of the city and push out real-time messages to members of the public to give them really much more detailed information about the air quality in different parts of the city, which can perhaps nudge them and influence behaviour change as to whether they jump in the car or get on the train or on a bus, or maybe even work from home that day instead. So pulling that data together does provide further options to do other stuff with it. I think I need to work through in terms of congestion charging, because I think there's something missing out of the puzzle there.
Neil, do you want to come back, having thrown that little spanner into the work?
No, I'm quite content with little spanners, Chair. Thanks.
Okay, that's fine. James, I think you wanted to come in.
Thanks, Chair. Just to pick up the issue about air quality monitoring, the centres refer to things that count cars or read number plates, is to reassure Councillor Buckley that although the national government required us to charge vehicles for the clean air zone, and actually our local work meant that we managed to head off the national government's vehicle charging programme. The monitors referred to here are ones that measure particulates in the atmosphere. So, and like Stephen says, it shows, it can give really useful information about air quality and hopefully make a lot of improvements to people's health that way. I mean, the question about whether a congestion charge will be introduced in the future, like I say, the last attempt to charge vehicles came from national government. We certainly don't have any plans. Who knows what national government will do in the future? But I just think it's really important to say that monitoring air quality is really important for us to do. And like I say, it's measuring the particulates in levels in the atmosphere, and it's not linked to sort of a reintroduction of the government's clean air vehicle charging scheme. I hope that's helpful information.
Thanks very much, James. I just have one final question before I wind this particular discussion up. When we last received the report, Stephen, there was some question about whether all departments were buying into the broader concept of what we would do. So I just wonder where that noise is coming from. The broader concept and whether they were recognising that whether their individual technological developments or needs were being factored into the corporate agenda. Has that improved? And you can have 3 sentences to respond to that.
I think it has improved in terms of awareness. I think changes that Leonardo is bringing in terms of the introduction. In terms of the introduction of a design authority, for example, that will really, scrutinise some of this activity of work that is taking place in various departments, and bring all this together, I think will increase awareness across the organisation. So I think that's a positive way forward.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Leonardo, anything you want to add to that?
Not really. Perhaps just a word on the Leeds Office of Data Analytics, since I'm actually engaging with other organizations in Leeds, such as hospital, community health, CCG, etc. That is becoming a reality. So there are some interesting conversation. One this morning, I was at the LCH at their exec meeting to promote the creation of the Leeds Office of Analytics, and with the scope, of course, of improving population health management, but also helping with economic growth. So just to say that those activities are ongoing, and shortly we will be announcing also how that works. There's a big focus which is coming from those organizations on ensuring that the focus is not on necessarily on a big organization like hospital council, but it is on customers, i.e. citizens, which is actually quite important. So I just wanted to mention that, because there is definitely a lot of additional work which has been done, and I'm sure at some point that will deserve a presentation on its own.
Thank you, Leonardo. Neil, were you wanting to come back in, or is that a legacy hand?
Sorry, Chair, no, that's not me.
Excellent. Okay, well, thank you very much, everyone, for your participation in this part of the agenda. I think both officers and executive board members can leave now with our thanks while we tie up the rest of the agenda, which shouldn't take too long. So thanks very much, everyone, for your participation.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, everybody.
Cheers. Right. Okay. Moving on to item 9, work schedule. I don't think there were any issues that were raised on this when we discussed it at the pre-meeting. So, in the absence of anyone signifying that they want to contribute, can we just note this? Clearly, the work programme will become the substantive property of our successor board from the start of the next municipal year. So let me just finish by saying it's been a pleasure to chair the board once again this year, and thank you everyone for your contributions and for making it a really worthwhile, I think, and constructive experience. Okay, stay safe everybody, and no doubt see you later.